till 5:25 to another couple of minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, but I think all of you do, I'm Cindy from SAPIX and Uphaven. I'm not quite going to introduce Ken because everyone knows him, but he's sure to tell you a little bit about himself when he starts his presentation to speak about or give you an intro on the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model. Ken, thanks again for your time. We appreciate it very much, and over to you.
Cindy, okay, thanks very much. So this is part of a series of webinars that we've been running on demand-driven. We started off with Precisely Wrong, which gears us to why we have problems with the current planning systems we've been using for the last 50 years. We then did an intro into DDMRP, Demand-Driven Materials Requirements Planning. I did run another one on, then we had a 3-hour workshop on DDMRP, and a few weeks ago we did one on the demand-driven operating model. So this is now looking at the much bigger picture that we're going to be talking about. So there's a little bit about me. I think most of you probably know me, but I'm an APIX instructor and a Fresh Connection trainer and a DDI instructor, and most of my work has been in education and consulting in operations and supply chain management, and around the world quite a bit. And yes, I've been very involved in SAPIX over the years and have been president twice. So you will be getting a copy of the slides, so we'll get those off to you later on. So let's have a look at the agenda for this morning. First question is, do we need to become demand-driven? And what are the leadership challenges that we're finding in this VUCA world that we're living in today? One of the key things top management needs to be looking at is striving for coherence with these 3 key things that we have in our business: working capital, customer base, and contribution margin. And what about flow and the missing elements of flow? Why is flow so difficult to implement in our organizations? And I think there are 2 reasons for that, and we'll cover those. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time on the 4 requisites for relevant information, because that's the most important part, is getting relevant information up the supply chain so we can get relevant materials coming down the supply chain. So there are 4 things we need to do, and one of them is understanding relevant ranges, implementing flow-based operating models, which is the last webinar that we spoke about, and then implementing flow-based metrics, and lastly, this tactical reconciliation, this bidirectional tactical reconciliation between these. And then, of course, there's the 5-stage demand-driven adaptive enterprise maturity model. So what is demand-driven? Well, demand-driven definition is sensing changing customer demand and then adapting planning and production while pulling from suppliers all in real time. This definition was put together by Carol Patak at People in PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft were just about to launch their demand-driven module in about 2006, and there was a hostile takeover by Oracle, and Oracle canned the whole thing, and so Carol and Chad then started the Demand-Driven Institutes and started to promote the whole concept of demand-driven. What demand-driven doesn't mean is better forecasting. However, that doesn't mean to say we should stop forecasting and demand management. We need to have very good forecasts going into the future, but we're not going to use them in our operations. We're going to use them in tactical and strategic areas of the business. It doesn't mean making everything to order, because we can't do that. Many or most of the products we have to be on the shelf in the supermarket. It's not about simple pull, and it's not about having inventory everywhere. So do we really need to be demand driven? Oh, by the way, I've slipped this slide in here as well. Any of you that have got Apex or DDI certifications, all the webinars that we've been running, they are valid for one professional development point. So if you need to maintain your certifications, then make sure you keep a list of these points as they come up. If you're interested in a book that covers this subject, I think it was about nearly 2 years ago that Carol and Chad published this book, The Demand-Driven Adaptive Enterprise, Surviving, Adapting, and Thriving in a VUCA World. And I'm actually quite interested to see that they use my quote from Amazon. I think it was one of the first people to put a thing on Amazon about the book. It's not too long, it's not too deep, but explains to management and the executive of any company working in the supply chain why they're battling to succeed with current planning and control systems that were developed 50 years ago, and why they need to change and what they need to change to. So get a copy of that book. It's really, really worthwhile. So as we know, we're all living in this VUCA world, which is very volatile. It flares up at any particular point in time. It's also very uncertain. We really don't know what's happening tomorrow almost, let alone what's going to be happening in the next month, the next quarter, or the next year. It's also incredibly complex. There's lots of nodes all connected together. And although we call the whole concept supply chain management, it's not, it's a network, and it's a very complex network. And I'll talk a little bit about complex adaptive systems in which we live today. It's also very ambiguous, and I like this photograph down in the bottom right-hand corner because it's very blurry. Although we think we can see into the future, it's a little bit blurred. I'm really quite sure what's going to be happening. We might have a rough idea, but we haven't got a very clear idea of what's happening. We also know that VUCA is the new normal for supply chain. And if we go back to 1965, and 1965 is an important date as far as supply chain management is concerned, because it's the date really that MRP, Materials Requirements Planning, was developed by Dick Ling at IBM. With his 12K of memory, he developed the Materials Requirements Planning algorithms that we use today. And if you look at the supply chain characteristics of complexity and life cycles and tolerance times, complexity, etc., it is totally different to where we are today. And I think I can attest to this because I think I started working in about 1965. And the only technology we had was the landline and the post office. And that was about it. And when you consider what we have today, it's chalk and cheese. And yet we're still using the planning systems that were developed in 1965 today. And so we think it's time for a change. I think this is an interesting article that came out of the Harvard Business Review. And if you read down there where I've highlighted, it says public companies have a 1 in 3 chance of being delisted in the next 5 years, whether because of bankruptcy, liquidation, mergers and acquisitions, or other causes. And if you read on further, it says this is 6 times faster than the rate 40 years ago. So companies are not surviving, and we believe that the reason for this is that companies are dying younger because they're failing to adapt to the growing complexity of their environments. And of course, one of the major things we have in our VUCA world is risks. And there are a number of different risks, and Carol and Chad cover these quite nicely in that book. We get the collapse risk. The change from within or without an industry renders the firm's model obsolete. And I think a good example of this is probably Amazon, in the way that they've gone into online shopping. There's a huge collapse risk for the high street shops and the bricks and mortar. It's changing the whole way we do things. Online. We get the contagion risks, shocks in the business rapidly affect other parts of the business. And I think Chad gives a good example there that in 2018, Ford, they make the Ford F-150, what we would call a bucky, they call it truck, One of the suppliers had a fire and it stopped the whole production line for several months at the Ford plant there for the F-150. So a small little thing can have a major effect on your business. Then we get the fat tail risks, rare but very large shocks, and that's what we've been going through recently with this COVID-19 pandemic. But we get other ones. We get natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, terrorism, either political turmoil. Discontinuity risk. The business environment evolves abruptly in ways that are difficult to predict. And I think that my own personal life, it's been affected because I used to get on airplanes and go and fly and stand in front of people and tell them all about this lovely stuff. And I can't do that anymore. And so my business environment is evolving now. I have to do this online. Obsolescence risk. The enterprise fails to adapt to changing consumer needs and competitive innovation. And yeah, there's, I think, a lot of those. I think the great one Chad brings up in the book there is about BlackBerry. You know, how BlackBerry was a great phone. I mean, I had a couple of them, fantastic. But Apple came along and Android came along and basically made them obsolete overnight. And then we get the rejection lists. Participants in business ecosystems reject the business as a partner. And I think the social media has a great effect on here. And we have a very good example of that in South Africa at this very moment in time. This mission in KwaZulu-Natal that makes Aquila water, they've got some bad press. Whether it's true or not, nobody knows. But now all the large supermarkets have stopped listing their products on their shelf. And so we get this rejection risk. So huge risks out there in this VUCA world we're living in. We also need to look at the organizational vital signs in a company. And there are three of them. We get working capital. That's our inventory and cash and credit. And that's a very important vital sign in our business. We need good working capital. We need good contribution margin. That's the cash generation rate. At what rate do we generate cash in the business? And then, of course, we have our customer base, which is all about market share, sales, service, and quality. And we want these to be in what we call in coherence in the center of this circle here. As any one of these three things start to get out of kilter, they start to get to the edge of chaos and collapse. And if we go over that edge, then we get insolvency and we get collapse. And so we need to make sure that these three vital signs are in coherence, because as soon as one of them goes out, it can affect the other two as well. And if the working capital goes out or the customer base suddenly drops off, it's all hands on deck and people are trying to survive in their business there. So organizational signals, alarms intensify as any one of these three vitals move out towards the outer ring. And I think a good analogy here is our own human body. We have exactly the same thing. We have these vital signs. We have circulation, temperature, and respiratory rate. And if any one of these starts to play up, our temperature starts we get a big fever, for example, we need to go and sort that out. Otherwise, ultimately, it could bring us into that critical condition and ultimately into death. So medical attention intensifies as any one of these vitals move towards the outer ring. So in our normal lives, we're going along normally, and one of these things gets out of kilter, we're down to the hospital or down to the doctor to try and get it sorted out. So I think that's a good analogy. I mentioned that we're living in a complex adaptive system, and in some regards, thank goodness we do, because it's complex and because it's adaptive. I think that adaptive word is very key. We can adapt. We have the ability to adapt when things change. So why is our world complex? It's because it's non-linear. Our world is not linear. Dynamic interactions and high degrees of interdependencies across throughout a multi-dimensional structures. And of course, this means that we have extreme sensitivity. Lots of small initiating events occurring in short time frames can produce significant nonlinear outcomes that may become extreme events. And this means that we have this proportionate cause and effect. A part that costs 10 cents can halt the assembly of a multi-million-dollar item as quickly as a $10,000 part. So it doesn't matter if it's small or it's large, it can cause a problem for us. So why adaptive? Well, adaptive refers to the way a system changes or evolves through a process. We get these three things happening. We get emergence, is a reconfiguration of the system, triggered externally or could be internally as well. We get feedback. It's a set of signals and triggers that are monitored by adaptive agents. And so we have these people in our organization that are looking at these signals, and they become adaptive agents and making the changes. And then these adaptive agents are selecting the best decisions and actions and learning in response to signals and triggers. And I'll give you an idea later on how we use this in the demand-driven adaptive enterprise. So complex adaptive systems, key attributes, characteristics, and what are the key attributes? Well, I mentioned the word coherence before. We need to have subsystems behave in an alignment with the overall system objective. So what is the objective of the overall system? Are all the other subsystems in alignment with that? What are the characteristics? Well, the boundaries. There are practical boundaries out there and limits for subsystems and the overall system. You might think that there are no boundaries, but typically there are boundaries that we have to work within our organization. Then we have the edge of chaos, the zone where equilibrium and chaos is going to collapse. So we need to know where that is as well. The signals, the communication protocol within the system. So we need to be getting these systems. What are my vital signs like? Are they okay? How not okay are they? Or how okay are they? So signal strength is important, part of communication protocol, conveying that priority. Unfortunately, in traditional MRP systems, we're typically okay or not okay. We don't know really how okay we are or how not okay we are. The MRP, we know we have priorities. We know how okay we are. We have that priority. Feedback loops, mechanisms to judge and subsystems performance. So feedback, closed loop systems, very important. And then we need these adaptive agents. Those people that are receiving these signals, they're learning and reacting to these signals as they go along. And then the success factor of all this, of course, is all about resilience. And we hear all about resilience today in the world we're living in. It's the ability to maintain or restore system equilibrium through these large shocks. And it's going to companies that have this resilience that are going to move through successfully. So what about coherence? What is coherence in our business? Flow, it's the coherence to flow. And if we look what George Plossel wrote in the second edition of Orlicky's MRP book, he said that all benefits will be directly related to the speed of flow of materials and information in our supply chains. He put this down as the first law of supply chain management. Carol and Chad have actually modified it very slightly and said it's related to the speed and flow of relevant materials and relevant information. I'm sure George meant that when he wrote this first law of supply chain, but I think that makes it a little clearer because we need to be sending relevant information up the supply chain so that we get relevant materials coming down. So we know that when flow occurs, service is consistent and reliable, and when a system flows well, we get good service. Revenue is maximized and protected when we have good. Inventories are minimized with flow. Expenses and ancillary and or unnecessary are being minimized if we have flow. We're not flying those parts in at great expense or cross-shipping parts from one warehouse to another part and causing extra expenses. Cash flow also follows the rate of product flow to the market demand. So cash flow, very important part of your business. So protection and promotion of flow is going to maximize our return on investment. So what about explaining flow? What is flow? Well, as we get an improvement in flow, we get an improvement in cash velocity, which gives us an improvement in net profit divided by the investment we've made, which gives us a greater change in return on investment. Okay, so flow is the rate at which a system converts materials to products required by a customer. That last section is very important. Products required by a customer, not products that we make because we have spare capacity in the plant and we fill up warehouses. So it's only when we sell something to a customer do we get flow. Cash velocity is the rate of net cash generation. Sales dollars minus truly variable costs, okay, minus the period operating expenses. So we're looking at cash velocity. So we have flow, greater flow gives us greater cash velocity. And of course, net profit divided by investment is our equation for the return on investment. So quantifying flow, well, we know if we look at throughput times lead time, gives us our work in process, or you can change the formula around where work in process divided by lead time equals our throughput, or work in process divided by throughput gives us our lead time. So throughput is the flow there. And the flow and the company vitals. We know that if flow is happening in our organizations, it's a direct contributor to all these three vital signs in our business: working capital, customer base, and contribution margin. So when things flow well, costs are under control. Unfortunately, the reverse is never particularly true. So once we get things flowing, our costs become under control. It all seems pretty obvious, but there seems to be a missing link for flow. Why doesn't it happen? Why haven't people embraced flow? It's been around for decades, but people haven't embraced it. And I think there's two missing elements for flow. And the first one is variability. As our variability reduces, we get better flow, better cash velocity, better return on investment. So variability is defined as the summation of the differences between our plan and what actually happens. And there is always variability. We cannot get rid of variability. It's always going to be there, but we can reduce it. Secondly, we've got visibility. Visibility is defined as relevant information for making decisions, okay? And as visibility goes up, variability goes down. Visibility goes down, variability goes up. And I think a perfect example of this is actually on our roads. You know, every time we drive to work or we drive into town, there's variability. And it can be great during the rush hour, or there could be an accident, or the traffic lights might be out. But once we start getting visibility of what's happening out there, that's relevant information. I can change my route. And I just love the apps we have on our cell phones today, the Maps apps. It's showing you where there's a problem on the road. So we have visibility. We have relevant information such that we can make a decision to change our routing and thereby reduce the variability on our journey to the office in the morning. So I think that's a great analogy where we have variability and we can't get rid of it, but having that visibility, that relevant information can help us make the right decisions. So the big question becomes, how do we gain that visibility to relevant information in the VUCA environment in order to best manage our flow? Well, I mentioned there are 4 prerequisites for relevant information. And number 1 is understanding relevant ranges. We'll talk a little bit about that. Number 2, implementing a flow-based operating model. Number 3, tactical reconciliation, that bidirectional tactical reconciliation between our relevant ranges. And then lastly, we must implement flow-based metrics. So let's have a look at these 4 prerequisites. Number 1, relevant ranges. And I think this picture on the left-hand side is really relevant here. We're driving down the road and we have relevant range meters in front of us. We have maybe a kilometer or so in front of us. And then we have this big mountain. That's our strategy. So operationally, we are looking at, should I steer left or right? Is there a pothole a few meters in front of me to miss? So I'm making those operational decisions in my relevant range, but I'm also thinking a kilometer or 2 down the road and saying, there's a T-junction coming up. Am I going to be turning left or am I going to be turning right? But then I'm also looking at the bigger picture, because I'm looking at this mountain in front of me and saying, well, what is the best route do I think to get across this mountain? How do I get to my destination in the long range? So I think that picture is pretty relevant in what we're talking about here. So relevant range is the time frame in which assumptions are valid. The assumptions and information that are valid and relevant will differ in these ranges. And trying to force fit irrelevant assumptions into the wrong ranges will lead directly to distortive information. So on the left-hand side here, forecasts are relevant in the long range, but not in the short range. Fixed costs are variable in the long range, but not in the short range. And a works order delay is relevant in the short range, but not in the long range. And a machine breakdown is relevant as well. But the boss isn't going to be worried about it when he's trying to work out what the strategy is into the future. All right, so different relevant ranges are typically utilized by different people within the organization. So we need to have these strategic relevant ranges, the tactical relevant ranges, and the operational relevant ranges. And they're all going to be slightly different. Number 2 is a flow-based operating model. And there was our formula for flow. Increased flow gives us increased cash velocity, increased return on investment. And flow-based models are nothing new. They've been out there for ages. Economics, mathematics, factory physics, management accounting, which seems to have disappeared out of our organizations, were also about flow. George Plossel. MLP was originally developed to help flow. Ellie Goldratt, theory of constraints, is all about throughput. Taiichi Ohno and lean. And Dr. Deming with the variability in Six Sigma, all about flow. So there are very specific ways to design a flow-based operating model. And there's a couple of diagrams there. And when you come on the demand-driven planner course, we spend quite a bit of time getting people to understand how to develop that operating model within their organization. So thirdly is the tactical reconciliation. And the assumptions and information between these relevant ranges is going to differ. There's a need to reconcile these assumptions in a constant, bidirectional, iterative fashion in order to drive that adaptation within our organization. Strategy must be influenced by operational capability and performance, as well as how the model might perform under predicted conditions. An operational capability must be influenced by predicted conditions and or strategic exceptions in future time periods. And then lastly, we need these flow-based metrics. Any suite of flow-based metrics must take into account the other three prerequisites. The metrics must fit the range. So don't go down to the guy on the factory floor and say to him, I need you to increase your return on investment, because he won't have an idea what you're talking about. So we need to have metrics that support each other and fit the range. The metrics must fit the flow-based operating model, so we must have flow-based metrics. The metrics must be reconcilable between ranges, and force-fitting flow-based metrics will directly lead to conflicts and distortion through the organization. It'll obscure that relevancy. And in fact, when I look at businesses, we have flow-based, cost-based metrics in the same environment, and they're just fighting against each other all the time. So what is this demand-driven adaptive enterprise model that we've been talking about? What does it comprise of? Well, it comprises of, on the left-hand side, we've got an operating model. In the middle there, we've got the tactical demand-driven S&OP process. And on the right, we've got the adaptive strategy adaptive S&OP process. From the adaptive S&OP process, we get business plans and parameters coming down to the tactical demand-driven S&OP process. Business plans and parameters, and we create model configurations. Now, this is different from the traditional way in which we run our businesses. At this point, we have developed a master production schedule, which has gone down to the factory. We don't do that anymore. We have model configurations which go down to our demand-driven operating model. The model then feeds back variance analysis. How is the model working? How stable is it? How reliable is it? How fast is it working? That information comes back to the demand-driven S&OP tactical process, and we make changes. We can improve it. But also, we're in the tactical demand-driven and SOP process. We are looking at scenarios in the future. So this is where our forecasting comes in here. Down here. This is our forecasting and demand management comes in here. We take this operating model and we project it into the future based on the demand plans that we have in our forecasting system. And we look at scenarios going into the future. Those scenarios then can feed back these model projections, innovations, and strategic recommendations to this strategic adaptive S&OP process, which then starts sending down new business plans and parameters, and we start reconfiguring our operating model, etc. So we have this bi-directional process, which we have never, ever had before. Of course, the demand-driven operating model on the left here is being driven by actual demand, and we have the strategy over here being driven by market innovation. So what about the relevant ranges in this demand-driven adaptive enterprise model? As we can see here, we've got these strategic, tactical, and operational ranges. Down in operations here, well, our time buckets are basically hours, daily, maybe a week. And the length of time we're looking out is really the longest decoupled lead time. Now, what do we mean by decoupled lead time? If you've been on the demand-driven planner course, you'll understand that is the length of time between decoupled points in our supply chain. So we're just looking out to the longest decoupled lead time in our business in this relevant range. The tactical range. Here we blend the present, the short term, and the past together. We're looking here at least one cumulative lead time in the past and up to one cumulative lead time into the future. And then when it comes to the strategic relevant range, here we're looking monthly, quarterly, annual time buckets. And we're looking at a cumulative range out into the future where the capacity and our resources becomes variable. And so we're looking out into the future. And I think if we look at a diagram here, a time diagram, we can see how this all fits together. So here's our demand-driven operating model, which is the present, maybe a week or so. Demand-driven S&OP is looking back into the past, one cumulative lead time, the present, and looking into the future, one cumulative lead time. Traditionally, our business plans go out about 1 year, possibly. Our strategic plans maybe go out 2 to 3 years. Our adaptive S&OP, as I said, goes out to the point where it's going to be totally variable, i.e. we can do anything we like at that point. Right, so that just gives you an idea of how the relevant ranges in the demand-driven adaptive enterprise would fit into your particular business. Let's look a little bit more at the flow-based operating model here. This is where we combined elements of MRP, DRP, lean, theory of constraints, factory physics, and Six Sigma. Carol always talks about, and I guess I was in the same era as well, it was the world of or. We either did MRP, or we did lean, or we did theory of constraints, or we did Six Sigma. And if you were theory of constraints, if you came, you tried to suggest anything else, you were a heretic. Today, we are in the world of and. We are using MRP and DRP and lean and theory of constraint and Six Sigma all together. They are all great tools and we don't want to throw them out. There's some great stuff there that we can use in our organizations. So we're pacing operations now to actual demand, sales orders, actual demand as opposed to a forecast. We're strategically placing those decoupling points for lead time compression and variability. That bullwhip effect mitigation. Every time the bullwhip hits one of these decoupling points, it stops dead. Yeah, it starts up again on the other side, but it'll stop dead when it hits the next one. We also need to have strategically placed control points in our system for schedule synchronization. The same way that an airport has a control tower, controls not only the planes on the ground, the planes coming in, but the planes going out again. It's a control point where things happen. And we know the flight should have gone off at 8:25 or landed at 9:15, but the chances of that happening are pretty small. So we need this control point. And the way we manage this is by putting buffers at these decoupling and control points. And in our businesses, they can either be stock buffers, time buffers, or they can be capacity buffers. So in a flow-based operating model, and if you came on the last webinar I did, we went into this in a lot more depth. We have the demand-driven MRP, and I think this is the first time we've mentioned demand-driven MRP. We've been going over half an hour now. So we have this demand-driven MRP supply order generation system, which is being driven by actual demand. It is sending manufacturing orders down to the demand-driven scheduling and finite control point scheduling system here, and purchase orders and stock transfer orders down to the demand-driven execution. Feedback from the scheduling system here, giving us promise dates for those manufacturing orders. We're getting on hand and synchronized our execution system here into demand-driven MRP. And we're getting those released manufacturing orders going down to execution, and we're getting the progression of those manufacturing orders coming back to the demand-driven scheduling. And this is all being driven by demand-driven with model configurations, which are basically your bills of materials coming down into your demand-driven capacity, routing information coming down into your demand-driven scheduling, finite control point scheduling system. But it doesn't stop there because we want variance analysis coming back. Okay, so we see how the operating model is working. It comes back into this demand-driven S&OP process, this variance analysis, and we change the configuration if we need to. And this is happening almost on a real-time basis. So we have this tactical reconciliation hub in the middle here. It's bidirectional. Okay, it's going this way and it's coming back again. It's a bidirectional tactical reconciliation hub in the middle of our demand driven. And how does that work? Well, we're looking at tactical review. We're looking at the demand driven variance analysis. What's the variance coming out of our operating model? So this is where all your Six Sigma people are sitting in here, looking at these control charts here, and how can we reduce the variance? Also, the tactical projection, projecting model performance within the tactical range. So I can see here into the future that I've got quite a bit of spare capacity on resource number 3 here into the future. I can do something about that. Configuration, reconciliation, shaping the model to the evolving environment. So looking at those settings, the demand-driven operating model settings, and changing them as and when needed. Tactical exploitation in the short range. I can see that I've got spare capacity here. Don't get the factory to make products just to fill up the warehouse and keep the machines running. Talk to sales and marketing and say, look, we have spare capacity. How can we solve that? Remember, we want to be able to make products that we can sell, not just fill up warehouses. Strategic recommendations can go back to strategy. Ideas for better model performance, needing senior level approval. And then strategic projections, projecting the model performance in a strategic relevant range. So a lot of things happening in this demand-driven S&OP tactical reconciliation hub. To me, this diagram here is absolutely just speaks acres to me. It really explains why DDMLP works so much better than additional systems that we've been using. Here we have a business that's predicting constant growth, nice growth going into the future. We know we have an optimistic side and we have a conservative side. We may be up here and we may be down there. We don't know, but what do? We take the number in the middle here. That number gives me what I call an average daily usage. Now, in the past, that would have been put into the master production schedule as a single number. Put it into our master settings, which generates a buffer, all right? And we can see as the ADU number climbs, our buffer gets bigger and bigger. But we can see that we have a capability range here. This is my average daily usage number, this black line going up here. But if my forecast, that number is wrong, and I move more to the optimistic side, I have this capability on the lower end of the buffer here. This is my maximum limit here. But also, if the figures go to the conservative side, up here would be my maximum inventory exposure. And so what we're looking for, we're looking at this capability range and seeing, does it match the forecast range here? If this is too small, we can make the buffer bigger. If it's too big, we can make the buffer smaller. And so we can match these capability ranges to the forecast range in our business. And I think that's a brilliant slide, that one. I just love that. But unfortunately, capacity is generally step capacity. It doesn't gradually increase. We can see into the future here in 6 months' time, possibly, that we're going to run out of capacity. So we know we're going to need to put something in at this point, and we will have excess capacity over the next few months until the system takes up that capacity. So I don't know if you remember earlier on, but we were talking about this adaptive loop here. Tactical reconciliation helps to drive adaption. Remember we were speaking about that? We have emergence and we have, we have emergence, we have the selection, have the feedback, okay? So we've got this feedback, we have a selection process, we have this emergence and feedback. So it's a continuous loop that is going around our demand-driven adaptive enterprise all the time here. Then number 4, we talked about flow-based metrics to keep that coherence in our business. So operationally, what are we measuring? We got to find ways of measuring these 3 things: reliability, stability, and speed. And we need some signals. What do we continue doing? What do we change? What do we need to really change? Okay, we need to be looking at these signals all the time and continuously changing our operating model. On the tactical side, okay, we're looking at tactical improvements and waste reduction. What opportunities are there to make more money? We're looking at a tactical expense control and the tactical contribution margin at this point in our relevant ranges. On the strategic side, what are we looking at? We're looking at those vital signs in our business, aren't we? We're looking at contribution margin, the cash generation rate, how fast can we generate cash? The working capital, which is our cash and credit and inventory. And what about the customer base? We're measuring that, market share, sales, service, and quality. So we need to be putting these metrics, flow-based metrics in place so that we can keep that coherence in our business. So demand-driven models built for that complex adaptive system. It's about flow. We want coherence, flow in our business. The boundaries, well, they're going to be primarily defined by the relevant ranges within our business. Specific zones and metrics that are carefully monitored. So we're monitoring these vital signs to make sure we're not getting to this edge of chaos. The signals need to be highly intuitive and visual, and we're getting those from the demand-driven methodologies. We also need the signal strength. We need to know not whether we're okay or not okay, but how okay are we or how not okay are we? We need to have some sense of that relative priority. And then feedback loops, define tactical, strategic feedback processes and mechanisms. So we're getting that tactical reconciliation hub in the middle of our demand-driven adaptive enterprise. And then we need those people, those adaptive agents, and they're typically sitting in that demand-driven S&OP process there. We need those adaptive agents that are looking at these signals and at the relevant ranges and making those decisions. And then, as far as resilience is concerned, strategic buffering combined with well-defined complex adaptive system characteristics are going to help us create that resilient enterprise out there in the future. So how do we get started? Well, stage 1, typically companies are focused on cost. They think cost reduction is the way to improve their return on investment. So we've got to persuade people that we've got to move away from cost and move towards flow, okay? Stage 2 is beginning to emphasize operational efficiency with a primary implementation of a demand-driven MLP system. Once we've got that going, we can then start moving into the demand-driven adaptive enterprise stage 1, which is synchronizing and leveraging operational capability from better flow performance and expand the implementation of the demand-driven operating model. At DDAE 2, the demand-driven operating model capability across the enterprise into the market and DD-SNOP and adaptive SNOP start to take place with organization. And then lastly, we're sensing, we're adapting, we're innovating across the supply chain for continual return on investment improvement. And we're moving into that mature, demand-driven, adaptive enterprise model. Final thought, thoughtware is a must. Thoughtware before hardware and software. We need to invest in our people's ability to think and problem solve systemically. If you can't think systemically, then you can't observe, identify, and resolve distortions to relevant information. It means that organization is incapable of thinking and adapting for flow at all levels. So ensuring and maintaining a framework for the 4 prerequisites for relevant information should be the primary job of senior management. So in summary, what have we done? We've looked at the need to become demand-driven. We've looked at some of the leadership challenges in the VUCA world. Remember, we're striving for that coherence in our business, those 3 vital signs: working capital, customer base, contribution margin. We must adopt flow, and those 2 missing elements of flow. Variability is always going to be there, but if we can get good visibility, we can mitigate or reduce that variability. And then those 4 prerequisites for relevant information: understanding relevant ranges, implementing flow-based operating models, implementing flow-based metrics, and then that tactical reconciliation, the bidirectional tactical reconciliation between our relevant ranges. Then we spoke a little bit about getting started in the 5 stages of the maturity model. Okay, so more information. You need to go to the Demand Driven Institute. We've got lots of educational courses. There's the website. I've said it before, go and sign up, okay? And then you will get a lot more access to different information here on the on-demand tab. Lots of webinars, information on the methodology, all about the education and certification programs. If you're interested in software, here's the compliance software. Yeah, we are planning to run a demand-driven, SAPIX is running a demand-driven planner course, okay? It's going to be 1st and 22nd of October. I'll be using the later version of the material, version 3. It's just been released, in fact, yesterday. And so we'll be using the new version of the material. And the Demand-Driven Planner program, remember, it's designed for planning, purchasing, supply chain professionals responsible for implementing and maintaining the DDMRP implementation. It's the official 2-day course for the Demand-Driven Planner profession. And well, at the end of the course, you'll receive a certificate of completion. It's not your DDPP, but it's a certificate that you took the course. 13 different modules. I'm not going to go through them there. You'll have the slides here and you can get the information off the website. But we go through the whole DDMRP process, 5 components of DDMRP, and we look at DDMRP in the operational environment and demand-driven SNOP a little bit. And then there's the certification exam you can take, which over 7,000 people now have attended these demand-driven planner courses globally. So you need to be getting in there as soon as possible. The certification exam, it is built on a more advanced stages of Bloom's taxonomy. So they expect you to be able to analyze and apply and evaluate scenarios. You've got 3 hours to do 50 questions, multiple choice questions relating to specific scenarios. Okay, and there's some more information there about the course as well. The exam, it's online, it's open book, it's non-proctored. And if you know anything about open book exams, they tend to be more difficult than closed book exams. So you can have your notes and references there. I encourage my students to have some spreadsheet programs on a second laptop. So you're writing the exam on one laptop, you've got some spreadsheets you've set up on another laptop, and well, there is a calculator in the testing mechanism as well. But if you fail, so that's also encouraging. Current pass rate for the certification exam, professional exam, is 69%. So you're tough when you go in there. Books. If you want to know more about DDMLP, this is the DDMLP book, 3rd edition. There's the book I mentioned about the demand-driven adaptive enterprise. If you do the demand-driven leader course, this is the book that we tend to use for that one. Excellent book, demand-driven performance using smart metrics. Deborah and Chad Smith give very good indications of the stupid way that we measure our businesses. A really eye-opener book. I'd recommend anybody to read that. If you want more information on demand-driven, you can look me up on YouTube. I've got lots of videos on YouTube there you can have a look at. And yeah, if you need to know more information, you can contact us at Demand-Driven Africa. There's the website, demanddriven.coza. And if you need to get a hold of me, there's my telephone number and my email address. So, Cindy, do we have any questions? Is there anybody still there?
There are still people in the audience. Ken, thank you very much for that.
I see that, yeah.
I am looking at the chat and I don't see any questions though. Are there any questions out there for Ken? Anyone?
I've stunned them all into silence. I can see that.
By the looks of it, yeah. Ken, I actually do have a question. It's not related to your presentation, okay, but we have earmarked 14 October for your DDAE workshop.
Yes. There's that one as well. That's a longer workshop. Correct. Which covers what we've just done in a lot more detail. Absolutely. Correct. I forgot about that one. Yeah. Thanks.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to double check and obviously let everyone know here.
2 questions in the
chat. I just saw that from Andre Kester. Ken, how are the buffers calculated?
Okay, have you got 2 days? I can go through that with you. It's not that complicated really. In fact, if you go back to the website here and look at, I can't get back. If you go back to the Demand Driven Institute website, go to the methodology, you'll find some information. Oops, there we go. If you go to the methodology tab here, you'll find some information there. But quite easily, we use an average daily usage. We use lead time factors. We use variability factors. So your yellow zone is going to be the lead time multiplied by the average daily usage. Your green zone is going to be calculated in one of 3 ways. It could either be an economical order quantity, it could be based on a cycle, or it could be based on the lead time factor. And then your red zone is the safety, and it's of 2 parts. It's the red zone base, and there's the red zone safety. So the red zone base is basically the yellow zone multiplied by the lead time factor, and then we take that number and we multiply it by the variability factor to get the red zone safety, and then we add the 2 together. So I'm not sure, Andre, whether that answers your question, but if you come on the DDP course, we spend a lot of time developing the buffer, showing.
Thank you, Ken. Andre, I hope that answered your question. And then from Frank, we have, he's interested in the best way to buy the books. How can he buy the books?
Best way to buy the books.
Yep.
Yeah, look, I don't think you can really get them locally here at bookshops. I usually suggest people go to Amazon and get the books. You can get either hardcover books or you can get electronics. the hardcover book for the DDMLP one is in color now, but it didn't used to be. But the Kindle version is in color. So yeah, I would suggest the best way is to get them through Amazon. And if you get the electronic versions, you can get them immediately and there's no shipping costs. However, if you like paper, then obviously you'll have to wait and pay for the to those books. But there's not really anywhere where you can get them locally. You might try you might try Take-A-Lot. They might get them for you. You could try them.
And then we have one more from Colin. I think it's related to the buffers. He's asking, has any company actually achieved this? Are there any case studies?
Oh, you mean for the demand-driven adaptive enterprise?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want case studies? We've got lots of case studies on the websites here, on our website, Demand Driven Africa, on the Demand Driven Institute website, lots of case studies. I think what's going to happen is that people are moving up the maturity index, maturity model. They are causing a thought side of larger organizations, and we've had a few case studies where smaller organizations have come up using this methodology. They've improved significantly, and they've become a major thorn in larger organizations' sides, and they've been bought out. So that's what's tending to happen. But there are many case studies of companies that have started to get to this level. And yeah, if you go to the on-demand here, there's a lot of case studies from the various demand-driven world conferences that have taken place. The last one being in Amsterdam last year in October, I think it was, October. Right. Unfortunately, we haven't had any conferences recently. There were three demand-driven world conferences planned this year. One of them being in Cape Town in June, but that never happened, of course. But lots of case studies on the websites.
Thank you, Ken. Eugene Null wants to see DDMRP software in action in retail and the aeronautical industry. Do you have a video or videos on this on your YouTube channel?
Not in retail or aeronauticals as such. I think the best thing is to go and look at the websites. There's a chap called Bernard Millen who worked at Agilia. He's now running the demand-driven tech offices in Europe now, but he worked at Agilia, and they're in Toulouse, and they've done a lot of work with the aircraft industry around France there. So it might be worth having a look what he's got and what Agilia's got on their websites. We can have a look for you, Eugene.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Any other questions out there? Doesn't look like it.
I've got a question.
Bill.
Bill, yeah.
See, I am still awake.
Good.
Ballpark figure, average size company, implementation cost from start to finish. Is it possible to get that?
Well, it kind of, I guess. In fact, I'm just thinking of a company that I've been dealing with quite recently, medium-sized company. We could probably, they're talking 20, 30 million rands worth of inventory. We could probably reduce that, I don't know, 3, 4 million. Cost to implement first year, probably less than $1 million. So the return on investment is generally, we find, fairly quick.
Okay.
Fairly quick, yeah. And it can be almost self-funding. Self-funding.
Okay, then second question with the buffers. How often would you want to review them? Do they need to be reviewed constantly, or do they have sort of a life cycle?
Buffers can be reviewed on a daily basis, and remember, as far as ADU is concerned and some other lead time factors and what have you, they they adjust automatically. You don't have to do anything. So some companies are reviewing that ADU and readjusting the buffers on a daily basis. Maybe that's a bit too frequent, but certainly once a week is probably the norm, I would guess. That you'd set the system up to review the sizes of the buffers on a weekly basis automatically. Certainly once a month is probably not often enough. I would say at least once a week review, have the buffers dynamic.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
All right. Last chance
Good.
to ask a question. Anyone else? No. Yes. No. Okay. So
Okay,
just to recap, Ken will be running a DDAE workshop, which goes in depth to what he's just presented on the 14th of October from 8:30 to 4:30. And as he mentioned, he's running a DDP course on the 21st and 22nd of October as well. So you can check out the SAPEX website if you would like to register for those workshops. Please do. There are other events also on our event calendar that we would like you to attend if you can. Ken, thank you very much again for this very informative presentation. We appreciate your time. Always good to have you here, and to everyone else for joining us this morning. I hope you have a wonderful day and wonderful week, and happy Heritage Day, everyone.
Ah, yes. Hopefully see you on the, yeah, okay. Enjoy your long weekend. Cheers then.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.